Hey, welcome to the Rhona Morrell Podcast. So do you ever feel like screaming out in the office, on Zoom or outside the school gates, for the love of God, come on, really? Then if this is you and you're looking for an honest, fun and frank podcast on life and business, then sit back and listen to me, Rhona Morrell. I'll be bringing great people on the show to talk, share and debate their life experiences and business challenges, keeping the show unpolished, but in a fun and unique British style, with sarcasm, tenacity, maybe a few swear words or tears. This podcast keeps it real, honest, raw, and removes the bullshit in the only way I know how, through authenticity and getting shit done. Think of it less like the Housewives of New York or Towie with the lipo and drama, and more like the house lives of the real world. I hope you'll take something away to be better informed, laugh, smile, or maybe even finally getting the confidence to shout, come on really. So enjoy. Hi Anders, welcome to the Rhona Morrell Podcast. How are you today?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you. I happen to be in Budapest today for a scientific meeting. It's a beautiful city, very beautiful.
Oh, I've never had the pleasure of going, actually. But for the listeners, I am genuinely excited to have Anders Wijkman with me today. And I am going to read off a little bit of his bio because it's certainly incredible, and then come on to why we're having this conversation all around the book Earth4All. So Anders is an opinion maker and an author. He's the Honorary President of the Club of Rome and the chair of the Governing Body of Climate-KIC, which is the largest public-private partnership on innovation for all low-carbon solutions in the EU. He's also a member of the International Resource Panel, and during 2015-16, he chaired the Swedish Cross-Party Committee on Environmental Objectives. So Anders has also served as a member of the European Parliament, as Assistant Secretary General on the United Nations Policy Director. He has a plethora of economic, political knowledge and has written various books, co-authored over the years. But the reason why we're here today is actually one of the latest. In 2022, this book, Earth4All, was published. And Anders was actually the chair for all of the experts that were inputting into this book and also contributing to it. And this is why we're here today, because this book actually addresses the kind of the follow-up from 50 years ago when the first Limits to Growth by the Club of Rome was written. So very much welcome you today, and thank you for your time, Anders.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Oh, fantastic. So listen, I'd love to jump straight in to let the listeners know what really kind of excited me about this book. So as obviously somebody working in this space and studying and reading and, misinformation and socials, etc., I came across this book through my studies at Cambridge, and I thought, okay, this is called A Survival Guide for Humanity. What could this mean? And I'm very interested in the fourth industrial revolution as well, and technology. And I think what totally blew my mind about this book was actually the simplistic policy solutions that you're recommending. So you've worked on two models, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is a too little too late model or a giant leap in terms of a fast transition, and essentially how to reboot our kind of global economic system. And what I'd love you to talk to us about is really the five main policies. Of course, there are sub-policies, but the five main policies that you've recommended and why. And I guess we'll go off in different tangents, but over to you, Anders. I just desperately want to hear more.
Well, this book came about because, as you rightly said, 50 years have passed since the Limits to Growth, which was one of the first reports or books that really addressed the whole and looked into the future and tried to understand how can we make sure that we offer decent livelihoods to the majority or the vast majority of the population, and at the same time don't overuse the planet's resources and pollute the planet. So that was really what the limits to growth was all about. And it basically said that if we continue to grow the economy as we had done then since the Second World War, we would run into a problem because of a combination of pollution and possible resource depletion as a consequence of populations growing and economies growing, that there are sort of limits. That report was dismissed by politicians. They didn't want to hear that message. It was dismissed by leading economists. They basically said, oh, you haven't thought about innovation. We humans, we are so smart. We will innovate ourselves out of any problem. And if there is scarcity of something, well, we have the price mechanism, prices will go up and we will substitute. What they didn't pay attention to or didn't sort of neglected was, of course, that you cannot substitute for ecosystem services and biodiversity.
Yeah.
And you cannot substitute for a stable climate. However much money you throw on the glaciers in Greenland, you cannot stop the melting. So I think conventional economists had a problem and has a problem. They have not really included in their models the delicate balance between the economy and nature. So now, 50 years later, we decided to take stock of what has happened and where are we and how does it look for the future. And first of all, we concluded that more or less what was predicted or projected in limits to growth in the basic scenario is happening. We are overusing the planet.
Yeah.
We have crossed so far 6 out of 9 so-called planetary boundaries.
Yeah.
And I think most people now agree that climate is destabilizing. It's getting warmer and warmer with a lot of consequences. But what is even worse, this is happening in a situation where still 4 out of 8 billion people on the planet are dirt poor.
Yes.
So many people live still in poverty. I mean, it would have been easier to address this issue if all of us on the planet had decent living standards. Then we could start, discussing among ourselves, what do we do? But now we have a situation where at least 4 billion people have to be lifted out of poverty.
Yes.
But they cannot be lifted out of poverty with the kind of policies that we have pursued, because then this little planet would not function as we want it to function. We would drown in our own waste materials and residue products, etc., and resources would be scarce in many areas. Not to speak about climate instability. So that's really the situation.
Yeah.
And then we asked ourselves, now looking into the future, are there recipes, are there policies that could take us to a better place? And we came to the conclusion that we need transformation. We don't need incrementalism, we need transformation. We need to rethink how we organize ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up with 5 major transformations. And most people would expect the Club of Rome, because we have been known primarily for our concern for the environment, etc., that we would start with sort of the green issues. No, we don't. We start with the social issues.
Yeah.
Simply because we first of all, we cannot neglect that the world today is very unjust. We have a huge equity problem. And secondly, we have a lot of inequalities also within countries. And we don't think that we can deal with the long-term environmental and climate-related issues unless we deal with the social issues that are here now. We cannot motivate poor people or people who feel left behind in our own societies, whether we live in Sweden or in the UK or in the US. We cannot include them and get them to accept an agenda which deals with the longer term issues unless we take care of their own standard of living and their and the equity issues that are obvious today. So that's why the first transformation is really to address poverty heads on, and to really understand that we need to channel a lot of resources to assist low-income countries to get to a better place. And I think for some of the colonial powers, like the UK, like France, like Portugal, like the Netherlands, to name a few examples, like Germany, they should go back in time and look at what they've been doing for a couple of 100 years. They have extracted wealth from all these low-income countries, enormous amounts of wealth. And now it's payback time. It's payback time. So the first is really to make possible not only a transformation in terms of moving from poverty to a better standard of living, but also do it by greening their economies. And we have to invest massively, for instance, in clean energy. We have to invest massively in a more effective agricultural farming system, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. So that's the first. The second transformation is to address inequality within our countries by taxing the rich.
Yeah.
And I mean, people don't like taxes, but there are such enormous differences in standard of living. And if we start looking at footprints, whether we talk about carbon footprints or material footprints, the 1% or the 5% at the top of the income ladder globally, and some of them, of course, live in India or in China, so they don't all live in Western countries, but their footprints are 10 times, 15 times, 20 times, 50 times larger than the poorest ones. Yeah. So, I mean, we need to do something about this, and we can't just continue to increase material consumption among some 10% of the population, where the rest is still standing still or lagging behind. We introduce one new idea here, which I think is very interesting. We talk about a universal basic dividend.
Yes.
And the idea is that to use the commons, whether we talk about mining, forests, fossil fuels or whatever, resources that we extract from Mother Earth, or we talk about the internet, or we talk about financial structures, companies who earn a lot of revenue by using these commons should contribute to the common good. And because they are benefiting from commons that to a large extent belong to us all. Why should you as a mining company take all the revenues from extracting whatever it is, copper, or if you are an oil company, oil or gas? It's not fair. It's not something that you have invented alone. It's something that was there and for you to use. So this universal basic dividend would be a way of distributing some of the revenues to every citizen. And some people, when they hear about this, this is communist. No, it's not communism. It's a very practical way of sharing revenues from the commons. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it is being practiced already today it was a Republican governor in the state of Alaska who some years ago introduced this idea. And last year, every Alaskan citizen benefited from more than $3,000 as a dividend. For the rich, it didn't mean much, but for ordinary people, it meant a lot. And you can just imagine if something like that would be applicable all over the world, in particular in low-income countries. So we think this is an interesting idea. So it's a combination of taxes and this kind of fee.
Can I just ask on that? Because when I read that in the book, I thought, oh, this is genius idea, and actually it seems to have worked well. Were there any knock-on impacts that you were aware of from those companies then suddenly not investing in technology or not, leaving the country, all of those sorts of things that on a media we would hear that certainly in the UK, or they'll stop investing or they'll leave the country if we don't, if we put these sorts of things on them. Did that happen?
I don't think, no, I don't think it has been practiced anywhere else, but I haven't heard of any such reactions or responses. When it comes to the financial system, we have talked for quite some time about the so-called Tobin tax. That would be a tax on financial transactions. That would be very low, but given that financial transactions are many, it would add up. It was never operationalized, unfortunately, but I think it would mean a lot. We have also been talking about the bit tax, so applying the same kind of logic on the internet. Look at the big tech companies; they earn billions and billions and billions of dollars. Of course, they could pay a small dividend to sort of balance the situation better. So I think this is an attractive idea. I don't think it's neither a right wing or a left wing idea. It's quite a balanced thing. It's quite pragmatic.
I suppose as like even for myself, all the data that I create, if you like, is making some of these companies a lot of money, and they use it in development of AI, they use it in terms of marketing, they earn affiliate revenues, all of these sorts of things. And so suddenly, I know that there are tech companies out there breaking into the market that protect your data. You earn your data, you own it. So yeah, I do think that a small percentage of something that is so vastly used in terms of data, for example, seems a fair representation of what money they're making versus the fact that it's actually content generated by millions of everyday people.
No, absolutely. And it's somehow a mystery to me that still 15, 20 years after the internet was introduced, and in the beginning we didn't really understand what was happening, and we didn't understand that companies made use of our data in the way they have been. Advertising today is based totally on analysis of what we favor as consumers, etc. It's sometimes rather scary. I have experienced. I've been sitting in my living room talking to my family, and we talked about something, and then half an hour later there is some kind of advertisement surfacing on my laptop about exactly what we discussed. So I mean, something is going on here that is quite dramatic, and I think it would be fair to compensate every citizen one way or the other. So that's those are the two major socially directed or inclined transformations. The third one is to empower women, to give women their right place in society. I don't think I need to elaborate on that. It's a question of justice, but it's also a question of I think making development more balanced.
Yeah.
I have experienced myself over the years when I've been leading organizations in the executive committee. If you are only men, the discussions are rather narrow-minded. If you bring in women, it's a totally different picture. So
there's a part of the book that I'd love to read out here that I made a note and put amen. But it says, we must also recognise that unpaid workers, largely, but not only women, provide priceless services to economies and society, enhancing social cohesion. How can this transformative moment be used not only to acknowledge their contributions to society, but to protect them, reward them, and empower them? We'd like to introduce the idea of a universal basic dividend.
Yeah. Yeah, that's there is a link between those two, of course, absolutely.
Yeah.
But this thing of empowering women, of course, has many facets, and we talk about pensions for women. We talk about the promotion of women in different professions. To have a more balanced workplace. In my country, Sweden, we have an ongoing debate about women's role in boardrooms, etc., etc. So there are many aspects of this, and we also look very much at education, because education for girls is extremely important. And it's not only Afghanistan who discriminates against women. Yeah. Many countries do. And we also know that if a young woman or a young girl is educated, it's much easier for her to withstand and not be subject to sexual harassment, etc. So and also it's easier, of course, to get into the job market, and so I mean, the education for girls is very important. We have also a few examples, particularly from India, where in communities where young girls are being educated, fertility rates among them are much lower than among girls who are not educated. So there is also a link to population. We talk about reproductive health, of course, and family planning. Family planning services is very important because population is still increasing. That doesn't mean that poor people are the main culprits or the main behind the main actors behind climate change. On the contrary, but in the longer term perspective, it's going to be easier to sustain living on this planet if we are not too many people. We are already too many people in some parts of the world. Look at a place like Nigeria. I mean, it's
and kind of as we've touched on as well with that, you know, there is a combination. There's a fine line between having that education and knowing your rights from, you know, be that contraception, young marriage, etc., but also ability to kind of give the right medical care and attention to a lot of global South countries. And I think, you know, we often hear in the West, but we've got to keep producing tons of food because we're going to have 11 billion people, and it's kind of this, it's an excuse. But actually, with the right principles brought in, we wouldn't see such a mass increase in population.
And there are many children who are born unwanted. Let's face it.
Exactly.
And we know from different surveys that roughly 200 million women today want contraceptives. They want help to limit the number of births, but they can't get it. Either because it's not available, or because churches or in some parts of the world, governments object to it. There are quite a number of governments who still pursue policies where they say we have to double our population, we have to triple our population. I mean, well, Turkey is one example.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, Erdogan has
Oh.
is a complex man, huh? So.
Yeah, and I think something you've touched on there, both with population and also we talked about it earlier, and obviously we'll come on to the other two main pillars, is obviously growth. Now, I read a really great book the other day, Less is More. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time I really addressed what does degrowth mean? Because actually, if I, as a sustainability consultant or, people who's working with boards, if I walked into a boardroom tomorrow and said, right, I'd now like you to see you transition a degrowth strategy, I'd like you to come away from anything to do with fossil fuels, plastics, I'd probably be kicked out quite quickly. But it's how do we best promote this within the boardrooms around strategies of degrowth, because there isn't a business out there that is not looking at growing. No,
and of course this is which book is this? Less is More. There have been who's written it?
Jason, is it Hickel? Hickel, yes. Yeah.
Because there is another one also written by an American. But okay. I have great respect for Hickel and the degrowth proponents, but I think it's a very difficult strategy to pursue and to have people accept.
Yes.
Because if you are, let's start with a small company, a startup. If it doesn't grow, it will fail. And this is the case for the majority of businesses, that they cannot start to reduce throughput or reduce revenue. Maybe they can have a steady state situation, but we really don't know how to organize that.
Yes.
So I think what we are trying to advocate in the book, and what some of my colleagues in the Club of Rome are advocating, like Kate Ravert, is not to concentrate primarily on growth as an indicator, rather concentrate on well-being indicators and be more agnostic about growth. Focus on well-being, like health, decent jobs, clean environment, etc. And if those are your goals and you meet them, well, then it's okay. And then if you grow a bit, well, be it. But it's this being said, to make this happen, you need, of course, to use resources in a much more effective way. By the way, in my opinion, we should have had a sixth transformation which dealt with materials.
Okay.
Because and now we talk about it more as a cross-cutting issues, but materials are so important, not only energy, because material use are really the thing that drives the economy forward.
Yes.
And we have linear production models. We use most materials only once, then we discard them.
Yeah.
And some of it is recycled, but the design is often such that you cannot do much with the recycled content, so it's being burnt or thrown away anyhow. So the way we use materials is very wasteful, and we have to organize demand in a much more intelligent way. Food is a given example. We waste around 1/3 of all the food produced. In developing countries, it's very often because they don't have cooling systems, they don't have logistical systems in place. They don't know how to get the food stuff to the market in time before it starts to rot and etc. But in our part of the world, we threw away food because we are arrogant. We I mean, if a piece of bread is more than 2 days old, we think, no, I don't want to eat that, and we throw it away. I can see with some of the younger generation, if the milk in the fridge, if the expire date was yesterday, they won't drink it. No. And normally you can drink it for another 3, 4, 5, 6 days. So I mean, we don't value food the way we should do, and part of the reason is that it has been relatively inexpensive over the last 15 to 20 years.
Yes,
and we have imported cheap food from all over the world at the expense of our own farmers, who are subject to stricter regulations when it comes to animal welfare and environment, etc. So I mean, the food business is a major challenge, and that's why one of the transformation is food.
Yes,
and there we embrace the concept of regenerative agriculture, which I think is very interesting. We have some good examples in the US of regenerative agriculture. It's coming along in Europe, in Australia, and it's very different from conventional industrial agriculture, because you don't disturb the topsoil, so you don't till. Every time you put the plow in the soil, you release a lot of carbon. You try to develop crops which are perennial, so you build road systems, thereby you store more carbon. You always cover the soil by some kind of a plant, so the soil is always green. And you talk about fånggröda in Swedish. What the hell is that in English?
I can't help you on that one.
A plant that sort of that you don't normally grow to eat, rather just to cover the soil,
protect it,
and then you harvest it, and you can make biogas or whatever from it.
Yes.
So by this, and then also you rotate the crops more than what you do in conventional agriculture. So in such a system, you save a lot of money because, for instance, you don't have to till, so you save those labor hours, and you have much less inputs, both of fertilizers and of so-called plant protection materials or pesticides. You increase the fertility of the soil because you store more carbon, and then the water retention capacity is increased. You grow more food, etc., etc. So it's a win-win-win, and you store carbon. So the food production goes from being a carbon source to a carbon sink, which I think is very interesting.
What do you, in terms of that? It's something that I'm hugely passionate about, and I've been working on this natural fertilizer project for some time now, and I absolutely get it. But actually, if I speak to local farmers and things like that, there's this real, reliance. It is a drug essentially on fertilizers, because it's this cycle of we need it because the soil's degraded and so on and so forth. And it's going to be a $600 billion industry by 2030. How on earth do we begin to kind of transition outside, of course, governments shifting subsidies towards regenerative agriculture?
Well, I think the latter thing is very important, because you need carrots and sticks, and the incentives right now are not directed towards these kind of targets or goals. So that has to happen. I think you have to reward both forest owners and farmers who store carbon in their soils. That's very important. And if you can reward companies who don't pollute, of course you can reward companies or individuals or farmers or foresters who do something positive. If you reward things, people who don't do something negative, you could do the reverse. I mean, so I think that's very important. Then, of course, you have to have a lot of education and extension services. And I do understand that the farming community is probably quite hesitant towards new ideas and new concepts.
I'm scared. I think the fatigue of all the legislations coming in from the changes in the EU, the subsidies that are being taken away, the green transition pressure that's being put on them. It must be, why so many are leaving the profession or simply just, well, we've seen it recently with our fruit and veg in England, for example. Of course, we in the UK media have blamed bad weather in Morocco, but we know it's way bigger than that.
Yeah, of course. And but I think when there are sufficient number of farmers in different countries who demonstrate over time that this works, and that we in fact we earn more revenue and we are more happy as farmers, then I think it will happen. But it's not going to be easy, and the governments must be involved because they must offer loans, cheap loans, for the new kind of equipment that is needed. And as I said, we need carrots to really incentivize the right kind of practices.
Well, actually, I guess putting our money where our mouth is and providing them the support to transition back to healthier soils, and then looking at the secondary benefits like reduced cancers, better health, lower cholesterol, obesity, all these sorts of things. So, I guess we could talk about that just in its own podcast. But I am conscious to get onto the fifth, of course,
the fifth
which is
one is
energy.
It's really about energy and energy systems. And well, we have been talking about phasing fossil fuels out for decades now. When I started to be involved in energy policymaking in the 1970s, fossil fuels was 85% of the energy mix globally. Last year it was 79%. So that's how far we have come, in spite of all these years of debate and climate mitigation policies. So that shows how far we still have to go. And the reason why is, of course, that this is difficult because we have benefited enormously from these fossil fuels. Our living standard would be a pittance of what it is today if we hadn't had these energy sources over the last 100 years. There is a Frenchman that you should interview called Jean-Marc Jancovici. He has some very interesting lectures on YouTube where he compares the energy use today with what it was 150 years ago. Basically, he's saying that at that time, every human being had his or her own muscles and maybe a draught animal or two. That was it. And we had a little bit of coal. Today, we have each European has on average 500 energy slaves working for them. If we would compare, if we would translate oil and coal and gas in different facets into muscle power, it represents 500 fully grown up people working around the clock with their energy and their bodies. Of course, some of the things we couldn't do. We couldn't fly with muscle power. But this is an indication of how difficult it is to replace all those energy slaves with something else. And electrification is part of the answer. And we push a lot for electrification. And we know now that solar and wind, I think also waves will matter. I think geothermal will become more important. And of course, we have to build electricity systems that are different, not so centralized, rather more distributed. We need storage, etc., etc. But it's happening, but it must happen 4 or 5 times quicker than what it's happening today. And it must happen in low-income countries Africa has received about 1.5% of all the money invested in solar and wind over the last 20 years, 1.5%. And in Africa, we have soon we will have 1/4 of 25% of the world population living there. So we really need to do something very radical, and that's where the poverty that we want to address in one of the first transformation and the energy system transformation, they must go together. And we are talking about special drawing rights from IMF to benefit low-income countries, so that they can invest in the right type of energy system, so that they don't get stuck in the fossil-based system. And this is urgent. This is very urgent.
I genuinely see that as a fantastic opportunity for the global South to leapfrog our conscious, unconscious mistakes and build from that starting point, from everything that we now know, and arguably we've known for a long time. But I guess that's what excites me about what could and should be happening. I guess what gives me fear, and this is a question that I'd like to ask you, knowing what you know now from the first book 50 years ago to where we are now, how do you every day drive hope that the money, the power, globalization are actually going to win over, or not win over, the majority, and kind of transitioning the way we need? I find it really scary.
Yeah, no, it is. And the main problem is, I think, that the economic system is so short-term in its orientation. And the political system is also short-term.
Yeah.
Look at America. They have elections every second year to the Congress or the Houses of Representatives. So they are constantly involved in election campaigning. And by the way, too much money involved. I remember when I met Al Gore quite some time ago in connection with the film that he had, the Inconvenient Truth. He was in Stockholm for that, and we talked about the Congress in the US, and I asked him, what is your hope for climate legislation? And he said, it won't come. It doesn't matter if it's a Republican or Democratic Congress, and at that time it was George W. Bush, because too many of my former colleagues are in the pockets of the fossil-based industry. So they will not agree on something very radical. And I think we are still in that situation that the short-term business agenda is dominating to a large extent.
Okay.
And you can see, I mean, look at the UK. They cut their development aid budget from 0.7 to 0.5 a year or two ago. My country, Sweden, we have always given 1% of GDP. We are down now towards 0.8. So we are moving in the wrong direction, as a matter of fact. And then the war in Ukraine has also, of course, made the situation, first of all, it's very tragic and sad, but it also means that development aid is much more focusing on helping Ukraine for good reasons, but then leaving a lot of the low-income countries behind even more. So I mean, we have a very complicated situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sort of a perfect storm. By the way, I met a scientist from Poland today, and I asked him how many Ukrainians are now staying in Poland. He said, we believe we have more than 3 million Ukrainians staying and living in Poland since a year.
That's equivalent to a whole country.
Yeah.
That's huge.
And I think it's commendable the way they have they have opened their homes, they have opened their labor market, etc. It's quite amazing.
Yeah. Well, if I could end maybe on a more positive note with you, Anders, and I honestly, I need to come and meet you, buy you dinner, and I think I could discuss this for a whole week with you. But what gives you the most hope every day with the rooms that you're in and the people that you're talking with? What gives you the most hope for the next 20 to 30 years?
Well, it's a difficult question. A year ago, I would have said Greta's generation, the young generation. Today, I'm not 100% sure any longer, because in the most recent election in Sweden, it was not youngsters supporting Greta who mobilized the majority of the votes. It was rather the opposite. So I think that there is sort of a backlash right now, and we see it also in the European Union with regard to the Green Deal, that it's much more difficult to push through the necessary directives and regulations. So right now, it's difficult to see which are the hopeful signs. I think what we have to do and focus on is education. And I'm not talking now only about the school system. I'm talking about education among ordinary people.
Board level.
Yeah. And among ordinary people. We have to bring people along. And I see in particular in rural areas that people are threatened or feel threatened by the Green Deal agenda. And they basically say, oh, it's easy for you living in cities to accept higher petrol prices, etc. But we living in the rural areas, we are so dependent on our cars, etc., etc. So they feel threatened, and so we have to organize this transformation in a way that all people are included and none are left behind. And it's very much a question of perceptions, not only about the factual policies. Yeah. So that to me would be the lesson number one, or agenda point number one in the coming years: education. And I'm reminded of the fact that when Sweden and Denmark and Norway 100 years ago modernized people's education, organized by teetotalers, by the free churches, by trade unions, etc., was very important to explain to people what democracy was all about, what the modernization of society was all about. And now we need, because this transformation is going to be very, very significant, we need to do something similar. And we haven't talked about it, but you also have some exponential technologies that are changing things dramatically. AI.
Hugely.
So we need really to meet with people and to help them understand what's going on. Yeah. And what are the right policies for the future.
Absolutely. Anders, listen, honestly, I think I might end up doing 5 podcasts with you, but thank you so much. And for anyone out there who wants to learn more about Earth4All, obviously this is the book. You can go onto the website. I picked it up from Amazon, but actually I kind of came across it through the Cambridge Institute from my studies. But it really does kind of address a lot of issues that are quite hard to argue with. And I guess thank you just so much for sharing the content, but also for being here today and sharing with us what you've been doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And if I may end on a positive note, I think the 5 transformations that we present or offer, they are very concrete, they are doable, and they would definitely get us to a much better place. And when I talk about get us to a much better place, I'm not only talking about you and me, I'm talking about the vast majority of the people. And
absolutely.
That's important.
Absolutely, Anders. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I do hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's it. You've made it. The show's over. Thank you for being with us. I hope you've been able to take something away, maybe solve a problem, or just know you're not alone. Here's hoping it made you smile with a few laughs along the way. Please feel free to find me on all social media channels, and you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just search the Rhona Morrell Podcast. Have an awesome day and see you next time.